Hi, my name's Greg Sizemore. I'm the president and founder of the Construction Users Roundtable, better known as CURT. And you are listening to Construction Connections, powered by CURT. CURT is an organization that seeks to share insights, experiences, and resources together among members of the primarily industrial owner and contracting community. So we're glad that you're here. And our guest today is Kevin Batche, and Kevin is an amazing resource on the impact of tariffs and what they're going to do with us, for us, to us, around us, in spite of us, etc. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Kevin, and this is the impact of tariffs on our construction projects. That's the title. Kevin is the Vice President of Procurement and Logistics at IPS. That stands for Integrated Project Services, LLC. Kevin has over 25 years of experience in domestic and international strategic project, capital project program management. He's worked across multiple industries, including pharmaceutical and healthcare. He's also been instrumental in implementing corporate initiatives and promoting ethical and compliance-based best procurement practices. He's got his BS in mechanical engineering from Penn State, and he's an active member of the Construction Users Roundtable, and we're glad to have him with us. Navigating tariffs in the industrial construction setting. Wow, what a mouthful, Kevin. So to set this thing up a little bit and add some context, tell us a little bit about why this should matter to our listeners.
So it's very topical, as you'd mentioned, Greg. It's very important as there's a reshoring effort that's obviously going on with this administration, and it's it's countered by the tariffs, which have an intended effect of basing more of our manufacturing, more of our trades, more of our work here in the United States. But what we're seeing right now is we're seeing an impact of those tariffs that's having that first term negative impact. So goods are costing more, services are costing more, lead times are stretching out. And what I'd like to counter that with now is some of the incentives that our owners are able to take advantage of in the One Big Beautiful Bill, which we'll talk about a little bit today.
Yeah,
but there are some countermeasures in there that allow the impact of tariffs to be negated and oftentimes completely eliminated.
So how are these tariffs different, Kevin, than maybe we've had in prior administrations?
So the big difference is they've re-intensified and they've broadened greatly in scope. And they're now paired with port service fees, which we've seen as of this week, that are directly impacting ocean freight. So that means there's inflation on all the structural metals and packaged equipment, plus there's pass-through surcharges that we're seeing on all the logistics. So we're seeing price pressure as well as schedule pressure. Quote validity from our suppliers. We work for owners. Our suppliers are basically shrinking the windows. They're pushing the risk back on us or back on the owners. Freight routings are constantly shifting from week to week. So the takeaway with this new round of tariffs is we need mitigation strategies early to evaluate the effects of tariffs and also what incentives are available. And we need to do this earlier in the life cycle, not at the buyout cliff where we typically deal with things in the past.
So let me ask you this. Are we seeing the biggest impact on materials, on equipment, on suppliers, on schedule? Where do you feel the biggest impact of these tariffs begin to present? And where do they present the earliest?
So you mentioned a number of areas, and tariffs are hitting them in all those areas. So for materials, we're seeing a lot of impact on structural steel and aluminum. We're seeing up to 20% moves there. It's hitting frames, it's hitting tanks, panels, piping. For equipment, the biggest hits we're seeing are on pumps, compressors, HVAC, and skidded equipment. We're typically seeing about 6 to 15% based on where the country of origin of that equipment is, and largely on what the sub-assembly content of those pieces of kit and those skidded equipments are. we're seeing impact on supply and freight. Um, High European, Asian concentration. There's a lot of friction at customs now. Our capacity's tight in the country. Port services, carrier surcharges, and clearance delays. But the hardest hit, I guess, if you sum it all up and say, where are you hardest hit? Those are the projects that are basically importing complex sub-assembled big packages that are coming and that have long ocean legs involved in getting them here to our domestic projects.
What are some examples of those, Kevin?
Um, Well, I mean, I can speak, I guess, more clearly to biopharmaceutical projects, but we have a lot of, I mean, the push always, and you know this well, the push has been to go to skidded equipment. Unfortunately, in our case, a lot of that skidded equipment is produced in Western Europe. So you have not just the big steel frameworks and the process equipment that's in those skids, but then you have multiple sub-assemblies that come from we have a lot coming from China, and when we talk about pumps and we talk about VFDs and we talk about other assembly items, but those, in order to cut back on schedule risk and take work off site and for safety and all these other reasons that over the years we've built up modular manufacturing and skidded equipment, now it hurts us because a lot of that supply base is concentrated overseas, and they make up a fairly significant portion of not just pharmaceuticals, but food and beverage and the EV guys and yeah, you name it. A lot of complex plants are relying on these big skidded assemblies, and they're hit hard. That's where a lot of the focus is.
Now, Kevin, from the time a tariff is imposed, what kind of lead time do we see them actually showing up on the invoice?
Um, well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of it in bid hesitation at the beginning of projects now. So, um, one of the ways we've able to mitigate some of the risk with that is we're paying tariffs as equipment is passing through customs. So a lot of emphasis has gone into, early buys have been the most significant advantage that we've seen. That's allowed us to hold equipment, pending um, this uncertainty in tariffs that we've never really witnessed in the past. That over the past, better part of this year, it's been timing. There's a tariff today, but wait, there was not a tariff tomorrow. So, there's a lot of strategies around that, but it's, you have to have the plan to mitigate the impacts ahead of time and can't wait for the reaction to what that tariff might be tomorrow or the following day.
So I'm going to jump ahead in the question sequences because I think you've hit the nail on the head, so to speak, and that is we can't do anything about the tariffs. They're going to affect the cost. You said as steel and aluminum have jumped 20%. We obviously know what that looks like in terms of project cost. Um, you said they also ripple through to schedules. Um, so you see longer lead time, contractor hesitation. What makes contractors hesitate? What would compel them to move on a project? I mean,
Um,
help us understand what fuels contractor hesitation. Maybe it's obvious, but maybe there's some other elements as well that go into that.
Well, I think the ripple effects of tariffs, basically, as you mentioned, they are causing the contractor hesitation. So you have lengthened lead times because of customs checks and constrained domestic capacity that they're dealing with. These trigger change orders. If the owner's shifting specs or somehow or another impacting the country of origin, they're driving contractor caution. Shorter hold times, higher contingencies, the port service fees, revised routings. It's all these things. So, for instance, we're carrying 2 to 4 additional weeks of float on any sea lanes just until all these lanes stabilize. So, our impact is to lock in critical path much earlier. But we're seeing that, we're seeing the effect of the tariffs in what the the contractors and the suppliers are presenting to us.
So you mentioned one of the mitigation strategies is just simply early buys. You mentioned another one is paying tariffs at the port of entry, right?
Hmm.
You mentioned also that you're putting additional weeks of float or lead time in your. What can owners do, if anything, to mitigate these strategies or to mitigate the impact of tariffs? Does an owner have any tool in his or her arsenal to use? And if so, what would you recommend owners do to mitigate the impact on this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that owners are implementing now, as they're becoming more savvy and they're understanding the landscape. Um, Up front, working just within the specifications and how specifications are written for projects, is having a pretty good impact. Moving away from a lot of design specifications and moving towards performance specifications, allowing flexibility in the supply chain to determine countries of origin for different pieces of kit and different components, and not locking them into, using particular items from particular places and prescribing exactly how assets have to arrive on the site. So allowing that flexibility has been one great lever to loosen restrictions.
Is that
Allowing,
to an owner though? Uh, is that risky to an owner's ultimate development of a quality product? Obviously, they're building the facility not because they need a facility, but because they need the product that facility produces. What's the risk of owners moving from a performance standard from a design standard? Do they incur some risk in doing that?
yeah, I mean, you do, and the nice or the way to use the lever is to basically have a dual sourcing approach to it. So if they can not have to exercise that lever, then they don't. But it does take a lot more work on the compliance side up front. It has an impact on, any inventory they have, the cost of change. So yeah, it's not something that's looked at lightly. But the flip side of that argument is there are a lot of areas that are being prescribed in detail that aren't necessarily an A on the risk register versus a B or a C. And you need to really take a look at those options and, introduce some flexibility where you can without risking the business.
So,
Obviously, you don't just turn it over and say, "Hey, give me whatever you can do to do the
yeah,
job."
yeah.
But there are happy mediums.
So let's talk about that for a second. So without owners totally just turning it over to some to a contractor, what's the best approach for owners to achieve that balance, that strike, that sweet spot in moving from design specs to performance specs? How should they go about it? What's the best
Well,
with your key contractors? Is it, how would an owner start? Where does an owner start in achieving an effective performance spec, moving away from what they're comfortable with? And that is those design specs. Is there a particular caveman sketch on how to get from where they are now to where they want to be in the future with minimal impact of tariffs on projects?
yeah, I think owners in general that I've witnessed in the past and worked with in the past, they're very averse to risk. So
Yes.
any switch in or any even gain in momentum without talking about a wholesale switch is going to be very incremental, and it's going to start with very low hanging fruit, and it's going to be, I've seen different sourcing strategies and different risk profiles that clients put on different types of projects, and they'll loosen up a lot of restrictions on, maybe it's a biotech facility that's building a warehouse facility. It's not a GMP warehouse, so their usual SOPs and stuff are a lot more flexible. Their specifications are a lot more, and I think it takes success in some of those areas before any owner is going to take the next step and risk something that's, maybe not so much low hanging fruit. But it'd be very naive to suggest that that's going to be a wholesale change in response to something even, like the tariffs. I think, you know, um, exercising some of the incentives within the new One Big Beautiful Bill, for instance, is a more effective way for them to mitigate the risks of tariffs and the additional, TIC challenges of tariffs. So,
Let's talk about that part for a minute. So, in what way does the One Big Beautiful Bill, how can it offset tariff pain? What elements, components of that thing can begin to address? We'll just call it tariff pain for lack of a better word.
okay, so maybe take a little step back for those that aren't familiar and maybe have not undertaken the painful exercise of actually reading that bill and extracting the useful part. So the One Big Beautiful Bill is the latest piece of federal legislature. It's, again, it's a bill packed with lots of provisions affecting everything from crops and you name it. Um, it is over 1,000 pages. I read 500 plus that pertain to what I work with daily. So it's written in very struggling legalese, like every document that I've seen come from any piece of legislature. But what the intention within that bill is the bill was written, in my perspective, it recognizes some of the challenges that are being faced as you go through this. This reshoring it's not a solitary event. It's a process and it takes time. And as we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, there's pain involved in it. And the pain is seen by our suppliers, it's seen by our owners, and they're seeing it in the tariffs and they're seeing it in, port delays and logistics costs and fees and they're seeing all that pain. So what's in the bill that's unique to our industrial construction owners, what they can take advantage of is a series of incentives that allow expensing of assets. And the target assets that they've looked at in this bill, they classify them fairly largely for us, in pharma. It's any GMP space, any GMP facility can be expensed immediately in the first year. So that's a significant amount of money if you look at how you put your assets into place. Again, anything that's R&D based, anything that's an automation or an improvement or a technology that has the intention of ultimately reducing the client's use of offshoring, those assets can be expensed. R&D expenses, small lab expenses can all be expensed immediately. So when you start looking at the cash impact of this, there's a lot of if staged properly. So you have to work with engineering and finance and all the way down the supply chain to be able to realize these assets being put in place at the right time to take advantage. But just in a general study that I spent some time with some colleagues on, and we went through, the project was somewhere on the order of 600 million, and the difference in cash position in the first year came down to about 132 million. So when you look at the impacted tariffs on the TIC of that project was calculated out to be about 1 to 2% of the total installed cost, which is significant. $600 million project, you don't want to spend another 2%,
Yeah.
and highly reliant on technology from abroad, that 2% can become 3, can be 4. But what we found was by structuring the project, classifying assets appropriately, and then buying early, putting things in place in the proper, that ultimately the cash position improved that to a 5% improvement overall in the TIC. So it's a lot of work. It's not, something you're just going to go, hey, we're going to buy this tomorrow. It's a structural change in how you look at projects based on this. And the incentives in there basically for reshoring operations.
So where do you get your information? You seem very well informed on this. This is a hot topic. Where do you put your fingers on whose pulse are you monitoring to get new developments in this arena? What's your
Sure.
source of intel?
So I think my core my go-to is that I actually read the legislature, which I can attest I probably do more than most of our Congress people. But so that sets the framework, kind of seeing it and understanding it. I have a great purview within my organization because as an enterprise organization, we have a business division that is solely life sciences based. It's pharmaceutical biotechnology. So I can see all that. I see how projects play out. I lend to the sourcing strategies in that, developing, working with owners there. We also have a division within ours that does nothing but, not nothing but the majority of their line is data centers. So I have colleagues that I sit with, on a weekly basis where we discuss what their owners are seeing, how they're attacking things, what they're consulting their owners to make changes to do and how it impacts them. And we also have a division that manages looking at silicon chip manufacturing in that business line. So from highly critical, let's say, high tech industrial footprint, I have a very good line on three major, um, major sectors that I pull from information, and I get to work with people daily. So and I won't count out the folks I deal with at CURT, because you have a plethora of individuals that are in key positions, not just on, the sprint team and that I work on, but, in going to, frequenting the meetings and talking with people and listening to position papers and stuff. There's a wealth of information that comes from there as well. So,
We did not prompt Kevin to say that.
no, I did not. It was an unscripted question, and I was just trying my mind, okay, how do I process this
Yeah.
and where do I get my information? And, I do frequent a lot of stuff on my, in my business centric to life sciences and biopharma, organizations like ISPE and Builds Bio and stuff that I participate in. But, CURT is another one that's right up there. And CURT is more of, I think, the focus of this latest piece because I'm looking at general industrialized construction in the domestic United States and not simply my own silo looking at biotech and pharmaceutical where I usually am. So when I went through this bill and went through piecing together how owners could, benefit, not just, what do we do to mitigate tariffs? We have good plans in place to do that, but how do we couple that with, cash incentive from a bill? I looked at how that could impact our whole family of owners within, within the organizations within CURT that represents a lot of them. So we broadened the look and broadened the research to make sure that everybody could benefit from it.
Sounds good. So you're listening to Construction Connections, powered by CURT, as you've heard Kevin reference, the Construction Users Roundtable. CURT.org, simply CURT.org, is our website. You can go there and find out how we may be able to help you. Our little tagline is construction's hard, construction is challenging. We think we can help. And you've heard Kevin allude to that. Kevin, talk to us about what kind of structural changes do owners have to make in their procurement department in order to absorb the impact or create strategies that mitigate the impact of these tariffs? So are there structural changes? Is there a most efficient way to do it? It's not business as usual like it was 2 years ago when it comes to procurement. What kind of changes would you recommend in owners to make? Or maybe a better question is, in all your business dealings, what organization, not by name, but by structure, is the best to deal with, the best to work together? What kind of changes? I think I'm getting at the question, what might need to be changed in the way we procure that's different than 2 years ago?
Yeah, so I think what we lacked 2 years ago was any kind of emphasis or um, any kind of focus on harmonized tariff schedules and derivatives on imports and all these things that are affecting us now. And I think the procurement organization, I know my procurement organization, we started in the pandemic because a lot of the drivers were the same as we're seeing now with a reshoring effort. But we put a lot more focus on the end of the day than we do on our buy bid cycle within a project. So we're working up front with design more so in evaluating not just diversity of suppliers, like, well, we'll use this guy instead of this guy, but really looking at the composition and the tariff schedules that go along with each individualized item that comes together, looking at that up front, and then working with design on approaches. Maybe a modularized approach was great for safety and labor off-site in this particular case, but maybe that's not the best approach now based on other drivers. So I think, strategic sourcing within the EPC community um, has really picked up its game. We look at tracking to a level that I think only we looked at maybe on government projects or government funded projects at one point in time. We're looking at it across everything because, we had certain behaviors that we modeled based on whether it was taxpayer dollars involved. So there were a lot of checks and balances and tracking and a multitude of other things that made maybe building federally funded projects a niche market of specialists. Certain companies did that well, certain companies really didn't touch it. I think most procurement organizations are migrating now to that sort of mindset where it's not just 3 bids and a buy anymore. There's much more evaluation. There's much more interrelation with finance folks that wasn't there in the past. Like, when are these assets going to be in place? When can I write them off? How does this bill impact it? We need to be a lot smarter now than we were. And, I think it's much more of a value add to projects from a procurement than, maybe so much as, hey, we got specs together, hey, give me a lead time and, when are we placing this order? Let's look when we need things on site. There's much more at stake now than just, is it going to arrive on site? Now, is it going to arrive on site? And is it going to carry an additional 20% price tag? And, are we going to be able to compress the schedule? We're in that, with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot more so than we were in the past. We were very much, engineering siloed as far as we looked at specs. We tried to get them to, neutralize specs so we could have more alternatives. But now there's a lot more at stake. So it's a lot more diversity of capabilities within a procurement organization.
What are the questions that a savvy procurement organization ought to be asking their vendors, contractors, etc., when they're contemplating a project relative to tariffs, obviously? What are some of the key questions that are new, different than they would have been in the past?
Yeah, so I think, the focus in the past, Greg, was, how much is it going to cost me? Are you going to meet this spec? And how soon can you get it here? And, we used this FOB term, like, you're going to deliver it to the site. Now, quotes aren't coming in from our suppliers like that anymore. So the questions we need to ask up front are, what does your fully landed cost model look like? Where are your components coming from? Where are they ending up to get stamped? Where are they coming in? What is the real country of origin? Because the scrutiny from the government that has been increased along with these other things, you say differences from maybe the last Trump administration to this Trump administration, the scrutiny on how things are classified. And, I think in the past I've seen people, we parked this framework in a free trade zone and put all these components on it and brought it in and said it was assembled in, Canada. It had no, but that's gone away. So really understanding the supply chain and the risks associated with it from each one of your suppliers, those are the questions we ask now, not just, hey, where's this coming from? It's like, okay, I understand that's what other options do you have if that fails? What is your backup to your supply chain look like? And I think it's good. It's painful, but it's also, it's making our whole construction industry have a much, much more intelligent supply chain from top to bottom. People are asking the questions, understanding the impacts, um, putting in, we can look at clauses in contracts. That's one way, that you mitigate some of it. But, the questions are how long are you holding the pricing on this? Before we'd say 30 days, guys would hold it for 60. Now we're seeing, and this is a lot of the fine print. So this is what you need to look and talk about. Oh, you got a 7 to 14 day validity on this pricing, or you have no validity. The pricing will be confirmed at placement of order. So there's a lot more discussions around what the total landed cost of any assembly piece of equipment, you know, um, whether modular or skidded or just a single standalone piece of equipment, what it's really gonna look like and what it's gonna cost. So
So for the 3 to 5 year project manager, project executive, this is all different. What kind of skill, where do they go? I guess what I'm digging for is where's the gusher? Where should they be looking in order to understand how to ask better questions, both upstairs at the boardroom and at the vendor level? Is there a repository? Is there a magazine? Is there an organization that said this is your best source of information on how tariffs are impacting projects? I guess that's what I'm digging for. I'm not sure there's an answer. Maybe I don't know, or there is none, is the right answer. But I wanted to ask, if you're new to this crisis, and I believe it is to some extent a crisis because it affects cost, it affects schedule, uh, where can I go to become more educated in what to ask and how to manage this?
yeah, so I think you hit on it a little bit. I don't think there's an easy answer at this point.
Right.
There's pockets of excellence. There's
Yeah.
people that are living and breathing this every day, trying to turn over some documents and some guidelines and some, whether it's an article or a blog or whatever to get the information out there. And there's a lot of people doing it. There's the caution is a lot of it is not very well thought through, or it's not very practical to our owners. They take things, a lot of what I've seen, it takes things from a pure sourcing perspective with maybe not enough insight into what drives different types of industries, what drives owner decision making. I think that's really important to look for sources that draw from, real time experience in working with these things. I wish there were better. I've tried to put out my research and what I've found, and got it out there so that folks can benefit from it. Um,
Where can we find that, Kevin?
I think most of the blog links and articles are either tied to my company, IPS Integrated Project Services, on LinkedIn. This has been a volatile year, so there has been probably there's 5 or 6 articles on what it looked like going into the year to this month to the next, and trying to keep up with, what owners are facing and what remedies they have out there to kind of combat it. The latest thing that's out there is the impacts of the one big beautiful bill, and how, hopefully some finance people can get into the discussion with the engineering folks and, have a resource to at least, kick the tires and say, does this make sense for my business? So there is that out there. Certainly I make everything I've done available to CURT as well. So you can share that with the owners and other EPCs and suppliers as well. I think there's learning, everybody has a different, level that they're impacted by this, and everybody has something a little bit different they need to do and need to learn. So, um, but, getting back to the pointed question, there's not one good repository, that you can take everything that's out there and kind of boil it down and say, what do I do? What's my plan?
Well, let me ask you this question. And again, maybe the answer is I don't know, or take some thought, or with something we ought to look at. Uh, is there an organ? Oh, well, let me rephrase the question. What could CURT do in order to service its owner members to manage tariffs effectively? What kind of services, resources, collaborations, maybe? And it's your opinion. I know it's not gospel. It's your opinion based on your experience. Is there something we could do other than having this kind of awareness creation by this podcast, or our meetings coming up in November in Naples, Florida? Is there anything else that can be, should be done in order to service the industry better along the
Yeah,
line of resources?
I mean, yeah, I think weaving some of this into our procurement and contracting sprint teams, some of the efforts that we make, the point of those sprint teams is really to come away after a shorter period of time with something usable to the owners,
That's
something
exactly right.
that they can sink their teeth into and say, this benefits me. And we've been musing on, different topics and what can, be to the advantage. And I think there are a number of things within this subject that, could be advantageous to, the owner groups. And maybe it's a continuing more than just a sprint team where we say, we've created this and now this is available, but maybe it's something that's maintained more so than, just a short-term objective, which I think has been great.
Right.
So yeah, again, I wanted to talk to you about that, but I think we can do something there.
Good. That's encouraging as well. Or is there a missing stakeholder in the narrative? Who
Um,
sitting at that table that's not there?
yeah, I think, in my world, from dealing with our clients and our projects, I think that the finance operation itself is not as uh how do I phrase it? They're just not in that day to day. I know they're behind the scenes. I know that, appropriations are not made and justified and ROI is not looked at, lightly. It's all reviewed and analyzed. But I think my world is when the rubber starts to hit the road and we start to deliver. And I think, once those financial constraints are put in place and there's a box, then, it's kind of, again, in my limited sense, it's like, as long as you don't go outside this box, everything's good and we deliver on what our expectations were and our product, everything works out. But I would think that with some of the new challenges and some of the incentives that are out there, that there's more of maybe a regularity required for that function to be in the project meetings, and as we move through different stage gates, they're there. But maybe them demanding a little bit more input into those stage gates and being more present on the day to day.
Yeah, you've outlined in the course of this conversation 4 mitigation category focuses: procurement, engineering, logistics, and communication. Procurement, engineering, logistics, and communication. What one has the more juice for the squeeze? If we're going to look at those 4 areas: engineering, procurement, logistics, trade zones, trade routes, partnerships, etc., and communication, which gives us the greatest value for the effort expended?
Well, at the risk of sounding biased, I think procurement, because timing beats volatility.
Mm.
Early long lead releases, origin controlled strategies, commercial structures to neutralize tariff, yeah, exposure. These have the most measurable impact on cost and schedule. So I think, and they're probably the easiest to apply, and again, I'll put that into a naivety sort of, approach and saying it might be easy. It's not easy, but I think it's probably the easier of the levers to pull to mitigate the tariff risks that are out there right now.
Yeah, that's the question. I'm kind of curious. You say communication plays a role in all this, and I guess it's keeping the executives, the EPC partners, and everybody aligned. Um, what's the best way to accomplish that, in your opinion, your experience? And I know that for our listeners, we're not holding this out as gospel. We're holding this out as evidence from
Mhm.
companies' experience, and But I think that one company's experience brings insight, knowledge, and understanding. You know, there's a saying around here that sometimes there's knowing in the going, just getting started, moving down that route. Um, but I cocked an eyebrow a little bit about communication. We certainly understand inherently why it's important, but why does it become elevated in terms of tariff management?
Yes, so I think the key thing when it comes to communication, and maybe a key tool that's been missing in the past, is the real-time tracking capability on projects.
Oh,
So putting your assets and your buys, if you will, your strategies, putting that into a real-time tool, and I'm not going to promote tools that, here of one way, but being able to have purview at a dashboard into the countries of origin, into tariff exposure, and monitoring that on a real-time basis, and having all the stakeholders that are impacted to make decisions involved in that review, and that and I believe that it's the EPC's responsibility to basically coordinate that.
yeah.
And it's a meeting that branches out maybe to a little bit more stakeholders, but it's also discerning a lot more dashboard information where you're saying, hey, we need to switch on this because here's a big impact. Instead of waiting for impacts to hit us in the face, we need to be dealing with them way ahead, and basically making risk making that risk register work for us. Having this could happen, okay, what's the mitigation, and making those decisions day to day. So the communication is vital. It can't be functional units going off in silos and executing projects like a lot of times folks tend to do. Engineering goes in the engineering world, construction's demanding documents, procurement says, give me my specs, give me this, and they're missing the nuance at some level of those conversations, and saying, hey, look, this is impacting us in more ways than just the required at site date. This is other impacts to the operation or to the capital project. So yeah, I think communication, that fourth pillar, is certainly as heavy, if not heavier than the other ones.
It
It's
makes
vital.
total sense. I think that piece of advice kind of answered the next question I had teed up, and that is, what is the biggest piece of advice to owners or construction leaders trying to future-proof capital projects? And that's, being in the know, communication, alignment, et cetera. That's what I heard you say. Is there a question, Kevin, that you thought I would ask that I haven't asked, or a question that owners should be asking of their vendors and strategic alliance partners, contractors? Is there a question that I haven't, in my ignorance of the subject, asked that you thought I would, or that needs to be asked?
But I don't think that you've really missed anything, and I certainly wouldn't classify you as ignorant of the situation by any stretch.
I haven't
Um,
read that One Big Beautiful Bill. Yeah.
well, I
Hey,
lived that pain so that others don't have to. Okay, that's that's my cross to bear. And I look, I'll be honest, I made it through 500 pages of it. It's very, I recommend it if you have insomnia. Um, But, all kidding aside, I think owners, and I see it now. I see it in RFP documents. The questions they're asking are maybe not as rooted in information that they see, but they're asking questions about what is out there and what are you seeing. I'm looking, I'm seeing people understanding that real-time tracking and real-time risk register, and that is important. So I think people are already asking the right questions. I think it's just a matter of, until um, everybody adapts it in the way that's most beneficial to their owner organization. We'll see different derivatives of how it plays out, but people are asking the right questions, and our owners are smart people. They're not just blindly building stuff that anybody can build. They're
all right.
they're building real assets. So
So something you said kind of prompted another question. Is there any way tariffs can be managed in order to create a competitive advantage?
well, okay, stretch with me here a little bit
Okay, I'll go.
on this question. I don't think anybody's ever going to call tariffs a competitive advantage. But I think the owners that are designing for this volatility, and they're locking in their long leads early, They're enabling alternatives. They're using these favorable legislative incentives to their advantage. They're optimizing their cash timing. I think they'll out execute their peers. So, if you look at that and how that shows up, they should see that in better bid pricing. They should see fewer change orders, and they should see better schedule predictability. So, it's the reaction to those tariffs that's actually going to drive their competitive advantage more so than the tariffs themselves, which
Mhm.
to everybody out there, it's just a tax, right? It's just
Right.
something I got to pay, something I got to avoid. How do I avoid it? How do I pay the least amount? How do I, impact me? But I think, just that being there and being so volatile
Yeah.
is driving their competitive nature, and they're thinking of doing things and delivering in different ways that will give them a competitive advantage against those that are just saying, "Hey, I'm status quo. I'm going to do things the way I always do it." And you know, we'll see where the chips fall, right?
Right. 100%. We've been talking to Kevin Batche, who is a senior executive at IPS Integrated Project Services, on navigating tariffs in the industrial construction space, mitigating the risk, and leveraging elements of the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it's commonly called. If you'd like to have more information, like to contact Kevin for further or follow-up questions, CURT.org is our website. You'll see a name in there, Ronna DeBro, who will help you get to Kevin, get some answers that he might be able to help you with. Kevin, any final thoughts as we wind this down for our good people?
I think thank you for your time. It's great to actually be able to voice some of this research and hopefully share it with some folks that can take a nugget of it here or there and help them with their day to day. So really appreciate the opportunity.
It's been a real education for me, Kevin. Frankly, I've taken notes on my questions, and I appreciate your insight, your passion, appreciate your commitment to CURT, and moreover to our industry and improving the industry overall. You're a scholar and a gentleman. I appreciate your time, and thank you. You've been listening to Construction Connections, powered by CURT. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.